Twilight by Tuesday Lobsang Rampa. Read for you by BlueFriend in beautiful BC. Chapter 10. I have been listening to the tragedy of a nation using my little old transistor radio, and I am just overcome by the tragedy of it all. Of course, by the time you read this book, the news will be old. Possibly even the new president will have left. I should never be surprised nowadays, but I have been listening to the tragedy of a nation. The tragedy is not the doings of Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon, I would say, is no saint. In fact, I should imagine that he can grow horns on his head far more easily than he would grow wings on his shoulders. But Richard Nixon has done a lot of good, and to my way of thinking, he has done no more harm than some of the other people who have been presidents of the USA. The tragedy of the USA is not the tragedy of the president. The tragedy is that the press, those evil, dastardly men of the press, have caused all the trouble, and I cannot understand why presumably sane people tolerate the press. There should definitely be a press censorship, but to be crude about it, none of the politicos have the guts to impose it or even suggest it. I well know how the lying press can fabricate the evidence, and then the press will accuse a person, try him and condemn him without even one iota of real guilt on the person concerned. I am not saying that President Nixon was innocent. Not even the most potent of those wonderful cleaning powders which are so freely advertised would make President Nixon snow white, no matter how many times he was dunked in the stuff. But he was not as bad as he was painted by the press, and I will go so far as to say that he has not done anything worse than any other president has done. I thoroughly understand President Nixon's point of view, and I should class him as a perfectly ordinary, commonplace, in-the-rut American president. The press have no right to interfere in politics any more than the churches have. It is always a source of amazement to me that in Ireland, for example, one Bible thumper has left his lectern or flown the pulpit to become one of the revolutionaries. What's the fellow's name? Paisley, I believe. But if a holy man goes in for holy orders, why does he suddenly start giving revolutionary orders? You get the same thing with old Makarios, who ran so fast from Cyprus that no one could catch him. He's another one, this time an archbishop, and he forgot his holy teachings to enter the revolutionary path. And revolutionaries, it seems to me, are nothing but a gang of murderers. We are all entitled to our opinions, and that is my opinion. I think that a cleric who forgets his holy teaching and runs bleating from his flock to pick up a rifle should be unfrocked. Not merely should he be unfrocked, he should be debagged. Debag is a good old English term, so for the American audience let me say that he should be peeled from inside his pants. I have had a lot of persecution by the press, and although I cannot truly say I hate anyone, I am as near as hating the press as I am anyone in the world. I would prefer to shake hands with Satan and his grandmother. Does Satan have a grandmother? Than I would to shake hands with the pressman, because these people are truly the scum of the earth. One listens to them on the radio and one shudders at the arrogant way in which they dictate to people. Shudders at the manner in which they try to force a person to say what the pressman wants them to say, and then, in the matter of the new incumbent, Gerald Ford, I listened to the pressman saying what the new president would do. Well, if the press people are so important, so all-knowing, then why does America need a president? Why doesn't the Senate or Congress or the Boy Scouts or something just phone the press each morning to know what orders they should give? The press people, it seems to me, are just a lot of illiterate, ignorant fools who are just ready to cash in on anyone's misery and even on a nation's tragedy. Pox to the press. I have a letter from a person who cannot understand this. He says, "Well, in your books and in other books too, it's said that every so often the world undergoes a sort of change of cycles, a change of civilization. But if that is so, then there must be remnants of other civilizations, and we never find any. So it leads me to think that you're not telling the truth. It leads me to the belief that the Bible is right, and the world is only about 3,000 or 4,000 years old." That fellow must be a pressman. But anyway, imagine for a moment that you are an ant playing about in some farmer's field. Well, you see this great cloud coming from the distance, and because you are a wise ant, you scurry as fast as you can to the nearest tree, and you shinny up that tree with all 6 or 8 or whatever it is legs. Then you get a first-class view of the world beneath you. The farmer stops his chuffing tractor and gets down and opens the gate to the field. Then he gets back on the tractor and chuffs away through the gate and into the field. Then, after he's scratched his head a bit, lit a cigarette, done a mighty spit, he hitches the plow up behind the tractor. And then, what was your world? That smooth surface of your world, with nice green grass and good clumps of weeds, gets in a state of turmoil. The farmer's plowing. He goes on plowing, and he is deep plowing too, so that all the surface of your world, which is that field, is broken up, and the inner soil comes to the surface, and everything is thoroughly messed up. Your friends in the ant colony disappear forever. One of the plow blades saw to that in very decisive fashion. The ant colony was tipped upside down, and then great clods of earth rained down on them, and after that one of those blade things at the end of the plow sliced right through the earth, covering the deceased ant colony, and all the sides caved in even more. On the next pass down the field, one of the rear wheels of the tractor pressed everything down deep. Well, you, the last ant in all the world. Your world is the field, remember? Shudder with fright. Everything has taken on a new look. There are great cliffs of earth standing up where before there was a smooth earth and perhaps grass. There's nothing that you know left any more. But if you were given long life, I don't know how long an ant lives, you would see the winds and the rains beat down the plowed up soil until everything became smooth again. But before that, perhaps the farmer or his boy would come along with a seeder, which is another device which turns up the earth a bit and scatters seeds all over the place. And that seeder would be followed by hordes of birds. So you, poor ant, had better keep your tail down tight or you're going to lose it. But that is how things go on this earth. There is what we of the earth call a mighty civilization. New York, for instance. Or is it mighty after Watergate? Supposing the end of a cycle had come, there would be terrific earthquakes, bigger earthquakes than you'd ever dreamed possible. And you wouldn't dream about them either, because you wouldn't live through them. The earthquakes would open chasms in the earth and buildings would fall in. Chasms would extend perhaps half a mile deep into the earth, and all the buildings which were New York would fall in. Then the earth would close again and there would be a few wriggles, and in course of time there would be no trace whatever of that mighty civilization. The waters would change their course. The Hudson would disappear into the earth. The seas would sweep over part of the earth perhaps, and perhaps New York's site would become the seabed, and everything that you knew of New York would have disappeared. It's not true, though, to say that everything is lost without trace forever and ever, amen, because there have been most interesting reports from deep miners. They have been digging for coal, perhaps, and far down in the depths of their mine they have come across, and this is true, a figure buried in coal, a figure which might be 15 feet long. They may also have come across artifacts, and there have been such artifacts found and placed in museums. There have been cycles and cycles on this earth. If you go to a farm and look out across the farmland, you can't say what sort of crop there was 10 years ago, can you? You can't say what sort of crop there was 20 years ago. Not even 5 years ago, not even 1 year ago, because everything has been plowed down. Perhaps the farmer has had a very good crop which has depleted the earth, so he plows the land and lets it lie fallow for a year. After that, he plows it again and plants a different crop, and so it goes on. The earth, too, is plowed by earthquakes, and after the earthquakes come the floods and the tornadoes, which blow the topsoil and smooth everything off and make sure there is no trace of that which went on before. So, young man, you who write and tell me that I'm not telling the truth, you're talking through the back of your neck. You don't know the first thing about all this, so the sooner you read all my books and believe them, then the better for you. Mrs. Mary McMaggot of the Maggotorium, Toadsville, is a great herb fan. She firmly believes that people who take chemicals, and that means chemical drugs and all that sort of stuff, should have their brains tested. Mrs. Mary McMaggot is absolutely convinced that you get good only from herbs. She thinks the rest of the pills, potions, liniments, and lotions are just a device to make money for the drug houses. Actually, there isn't any difference usually between the drugs we get out of herbs and the drugs which are made in a factory. You know how it all happens, don't you? Well, let's take as our example an herb which is rich in iron. Now, the iron in that plant does not grow there, provided by a benevolent nature who knows that in time Mrs. McMaggot will want an iron tonic. The iron came from the ground, and I'm going to advise you to look on things something like this. All plants are cellulose. They are like cellulose sponges, and the cells in the sponges are filled with the life material of the plant. The cellulose is a form of skeleton, a form of support for the plant. So this particular plant that we're examining is very partial to soil which has a strong iron ore element in it. It grows well in such circumstances, and the iron ore is absorbed by the far-spreading roots of the plant, and is then taken up by the sap and conveyed through all the cellulose tissues of the plant. There it is, lodged in those cavities, just as one can mop up dirty water with a sponge and get the sediment lodged in the cells of the sponge. Well, along comes an herbalist, grabs a handful of iron-bearing plants, and messes about with them. Perhaps he makes a tea of them, perhaps he mashes them up, but anyway, he makes some awful unsavory goo and takes the stuff. If he was lucky, and he's got hold of a plant which had been successful in getting a good quantity of iron ore, he feels better for it. But if he finds a barren sort of plant, then he says some naughty words and goes on to some pills. All the big drug houses send research teams into exotic parts of the world, such as the interior of Brazil. There, the research people find all manner of plants which grow nowhere else in the world, perhaps, because Brazil is truly a wonderful, wonderful country for its natural resources. The plants are carefully noted, photographed, checked, and then bundled up and sent to research laboratories, where they are again examined in the light of information which has been obtained from natives. Perhaps a native witch doctor uses this herb or that herb for curing barrenness or rheumatism or something else. Well, the native witch doctors are usually right. They have generation after generation of passed on experience to guide them. So you can be sure that if they say that such and such a plant is good for this or that complaint, they're perfectly correct. The research team breaks down the plants, analyzes them, makes them into essences, makes them into crystals, and they find out every single item about that plant, what it consists of, what it has secreted, and all the rest. And, as is very frequently the case, they can isolate a certain chemical which is responsible for the cures claimed by the witch doctors. Then, having that chemical further analyzed, they can copy it exactly. So we have the chemical of the plant merely duplicated by the chemical in the laboratory, the man-made thing, and the man-made thing has a great advantage over the herbal chemical because there is no method of telling the potency of the herbal chemical. There might, indeed, be none. But if a thing is copied and manufactured in the laboratory, then one can at all times prescribe an absolutely accurate dose. I am thinking particularly of curare. Certain of the Amazon Brazilians, they call them Indians, used curare extract on arrows or spears, and if they shoot an arrow so coated at an animal, the animal keels over, paralyzed. But there's a lot of hit or miss because, again, in an herb which grows in the ground, you can't be sure of your dosage. Years ago, it was found that curare was useful to surgeons in paralyzing a patient on the operating table and making his muscles relax. But when the herb was administered, the results were uncertain. Either the poor wretch was killed, or often he didn't get a strong enough dose to be effective. But now that the drug curare is manufactured artificially, there is no risk, because at all times there is an exact dosage. So, Mrs. Mary McMaggot, it's a good thing that we can have factory-made chemical drugs which permit us to prescribe and dose with accuracy. Just think if you had to go out and chew up a pound of fennel before you found your cough was curing. Now you can take a little liquid and find that you can get your cough better really fast. Another person writes and asks, what do I think of Arabs and Jews? Well, to tell you the truth, I don't think anything particular about them, because while on earth they are much the same type of people. Arabs and Jews were very friendly indeed just a few years ago. They mingled, Arabs in Jewish communities and Jews in Arab communities, and they were on the closest terms possible. There was no dispute between them, no dispute at all. But you know, one of the facts of life is that love and hate are very similar, very close. You can have absolute love for a person which turns to absolute hatred almost overnight. Or you can have a most vicious, bitter enemy, and then you can find that you love her almost before you know what is happening. It is because the chemicals are wrong in the two people concerned. It might be that Arabs and Jews have changed their eating habits somewhat, and so that the chemical intake leads to the opposition of their vibrations. If a person's vibrations are not compatible with another person's, then we have hatred, and the vibrations are very often governed by the sort of food we eat, because the food gives us our chemical intake. That is why, in so many cases, mega vitamin treatment works wonders, and in other cases it can have no effect at all. So, If we got a bunch of Jews and a bunch of Arabs and we fed them on the same stuff, perhaps they would get on together and not try to cut each other's throats behind their back, so to speak. But I know, or knew, quite a lot of good Arabs, and now I know quite a lot of good Jews. Unfortunately, I have met one or two bad ones as well, but then I've also met some bad Buddhists. Often I get letters from Germany really giving me a working over because my books are not published in Germany. I can't help that. There was quite a campaign against me in Germany, started up by a few fellows who were jealous because I wrote about Tibet. Jealous because I wrote true books about Tibet. And so quite a press campaign was started against me. But it seems to me that the Germans are an unlovely people. It seems to me that they are the troublemakers of Europe. They are so humorless, so deadpan, so righteous. So much so that I have had to decide that I wouldn't have my books published in Germany. I cannot stand these literal people, and I have often written to people in Germany and given them my honest opinion, which is that it would have been better for the rest of Europe, perhaps, if the Russians had taken over the whole of Germany. If you look at history, you'll find that the Germans have made an awful commotion in the world, all the way back to the time of Attila the Hun. So, Mr. German, who is being so cross because he can't get my books in German, I don't want them published in German, and I wouldn't care two hoots. I couldn't care even half a hoot what Germans think about it. A gent here, I'm sure he is a gent by the way he writes, believes that it must be wonderful to be an author. You don't do any work, you just walk about a room dictating to a staff of secretaries who hang on every word that the author utters and then struggle to put those words into beautiful prose that will hypnotize a publisher into paying wonderful royalties. This fellow thinks that all authors are millionaires. All authors fly about the world with first-class tickets, or perhaps I should say first-class credit cards, and drive whacking great sports cars or Rolls Royces. Do you think I could take a minute or two to tell him to wake up? It's not so easy as all that. I believe the late Edgar Wallace had a formula which was like a skeleton of a book, and he kept on ringing the changes, having about 6 or 7 different sets of plots whereby he hung different names, different locations, and different crimes onto that book skeleton. And then he used to stride about the room with a long cigarette holder in his hand, dictating out of the corner of his mouth — you have to if you're smoking at the same time — to 2 or 3 typists. Well, that's mass production. The average poor wretch of an author doesn't do it that way. Anyway, do you know what true books need? Let me tell you. First of all, if you're going to write a true book, you must have had some true experiences. You must have had some horrible experiences which scar you for life. People who have been in prison camps, for instance, are never the same. They're scarred. Often their health has deteriorated and is deteriorating as a result of their experiences. So they have the knowledge of certain things. But then they have to be able to write. They have to be able to put words describing their experiences in passable, interesting form. If they can do that, then they have to be sure that their experiences are such that people want to read about them. After they've typed the book, they have to get a publisher to read the typescript. But first of all, before a publisher will consider such a typescript, you have to have certain mechanical disciplines. You seem to be interested, and so I will tell you about it. You have to type on one side of the page without too many mistakes. You have to have double line spacing. You count 10 words to each line and 25 lines to each page. That gives you 250 words to a page. Now, a chapter in my average book consists of 20 pages. That means 5,000 words. And I usually have 12 chapters, which adds up to about 60,000 words. And when you've got up to 60,000 words, you find you have left out something important. So you add on a few words more. It is, it seems, very necessary that you get your chapters much about the same length, because you don't get one man to set up your book. The book is divided between a number of typesetters, and if one gets short chapters and another gets long chapters, well, there might be trouble with the union or something. So it's better to get your chapters fairly even, about 5,000 words to a chapter, perhaps with a bit shorter chapter in the beginning and a bit shorter chapter at the end. So, if you can do that, and your typing is neat enough, then you may get a publisher to read it. And reading a typescript is the first step to getting it published. By far, the best method of getting a book to your publisher is to use the services of an agent. I have a very good one indeed. Throughout the years, we are not just agent and client, but I consider Mr. Knight as my friend. He is that jewel of agents, a completely honest man. It is, obviously, absolutely necessary that your agent be honest and work on your behalf. The name of the firm is Stephen Ask, of 39 Victoria Street, London, England. But I must warn you that if you send muck, which will never have a chance of getting printed, then an agent is justified in charging you a reading fee. So if you, full of literary zeal, feel a compelling urge to write, then you would be well advised to get in touch with an agent such as Mr. Knight, enclosing return postage, and you will ask him his advice. Is there a market for such and such a thing, etc.? If there is, he will tell you so, and he will undoubtedly suggest that you do a synopsis of perhaps 5,000 words, telling briefly what the book is going to be about. Don't send stuff without writing first, and don't expect an agent or an author either to answer your letter unless you put in entirely adequate postage. An agent has to pay for printing. He has to pay for typing. He has to pay for time, overhead, such as electricity and heating, etc., taxes on his building, rent on his building. And if you do not observe the decencies of life and enclose adequate postage, your prospective agent may do just what I would do: toss the stuff in the garbage. A good agent is invaluable. He will get in touch with the publishers in other countries, and he will get after publishers to pay on time. And believe me, some publishers do not. But if you think that you're going to make a fortune out of writing, go out and pick up a shovel and become a builder or something like that. These are the people who make money nowadays. The author, unless he's got something particular to say, often does not make enough money to live on. And a hungry author is a horrible sight indeed. People write to me asking what I recommend in music. People who want to be elevated, raised up, given spiritual uplift and all that. Well, it's very appropriate at this moment because I've just had a letter from a young man in England who takes me to task because of what I said about present-day music. Not only that, but he sends me a sample of what he considers to be good music. I have no record player, so a friend of mine tried it, and apparently the result is that the poor friend is almost a friend no longer, because the music was jangle, jangle, bang, 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 like a procession of mad garbage collectors with St. Vitus dance beating garbage can lids together. Hey, I wish you wouldn't send me some of these hard rock records. My, you'll make me lose my few friends if you do. So take warning from this. I have no record player. I believe that music should be soothing. It should be the type of thing which makes a feeling of goodness, the sort of music which raises your vibrations. I believe that a lot of neurotic tendencies in life nowadays are caused by unsuitable music because, you see, when you listen to music, your own personal vibrations vibrate in sympathy or as a harmonic to that which you are hearing. So, if you're listening to a lot of disturbing jive, I think that's what that stuff is called, your own personal vibrations will be set on edge. It seems to me that so many nervous complaints have been caused by imitation stereo belching out hard rock at enormous volume and really upsetting one's psyche. So, if you want to progress spiritually, you'll start listening to some of the old masters, some of the definite classicals, some of the music which the younger generation will not listen to, and perhaps never have listened to, because they think everything to do with the establishment is against their interests. We get much the same type of thing with the radio nowadays. One is trying to listen to a good musical program. And over here, on the North American continent at least, we get interrupted with hysterical announcements that Blog's pills will cure everything from constipation to corns. Well, That is very bad. Not the constipation or corns, but the sudden, frenetic announcement uttered in hysterical tones, because it completely shatters the smooth vibrations which had built up through good music. So, if you want to listen to good music, get it on records or on tape, so that you don't have a hysterical young man bawling the love song of patent medicine. Now, Dr. Rampa, the letter said, you have done 14 books so far. Are you going to go on writing? I think you should go on writing. I think you should write until the end. Well, madam, you refer to 14 books. This is the 15th, this Twilight. And why shouldn't I write some more, as you say? After all, I might get as far as midnight, who knows? It depends on the public demand, because a publisher won't publish books unless there is a demand for them. And there's no guarantee, you know, that an author can write a book and be sure of its acceptance. An author is like a blind man. He has to feel his way. So if you want more books, why not write to my publisher and ask for them? If you want better covers, and I surely hope you do, then why not write to my publisher and tell him so? And if you do not like the fading yellow paper which the publisher uses, well, please tell him. Do not tell me, because I assure you on all the holy books there are that I have no say in the matter of covers, illustrations, the type of paper used, or the size of print. So you can beat up the publisher instead. It's something I cannot do. People write to Miss Coo-ee and to Mrs. Fifi Grey Whiskers. Of course, these two ladies are no longer on this earth. A cat's life is a very short life, you know. They live about 7 times faster than a human. So a year in our time is equal to 7 years in a cat's time. Now, Miss Cleopatra is, in cat time, nearly 60 years of age. Miss Cleopatra Rampa is a seal-pointed Siamese cat, and I say in all seriousness that she is the most intelligent person I've ever met, no matter whether that person be human or what. Miss Cleopatra is by far the most intelligent, most sympathetic, and most loving of all. She looks after me. As you know, or should know by now, I am ill, and a short time ago I was very ill indeed, and it was enjoined upon me that I should not move more than I really had to. Well, Miss Cleopatra took it upon herself to sit by me at night. She sat on a little bedside table, which I have, actually a hospital bed table, and she would sit upright all night, and if I dared move more than she thought necessary, she would reach out and give me a thoroughly hard slap, as if I was a bad child whom she was disciplining. She does do rounds just like a hospital nurse. When she's not on duty full-time by my bedside, she will come in several times during the night and very quietly jump on my bed. Of course, I'm not supposed to know. And then she will creep stealthily up beside me and peer intently into my face to make sure I'm breathing satisfactorily. If I am, she will quietly go away. If I'm not, she makes a commotion, which fetches other people. All the time I've known her, I have never known Cleopatra to be irritable or cross or anything except absolutely sweet-tempered and reasonable. And if there is a thing that one doesn't like her to do, one can just tell her so in an ordinary normal voice, and she won't do it anymore. Buttercup, for example, did not like little people sitting on her hats, which, presumably, from a woman's point of view, is reasonable. She told Cleo without anger, without irritation, and Cleo hasn't done it since. Fat Taddy lives with us as well. She's a Blue Point Siamese cat, much heavier than Cleo, and she's not so intelligent in a material, physical sort of way, although compared to other cats, she's highly intelligent. Her particular talent lies in the realms of telepathy. She is the most telepathic creature I have ever met, and when she wants to, she can get over her message as loudly as a public address system blaring in one's ears. She is the responsibility of Cleo, who more or less shepherds her around and sees as she behaves herself. But Cleo is my special guardian. Taddy is more interested in guarding the food. People write to me, as you may have gathered, and ask all sorts of strange questions. They ask all sorts of personal questions, too. For instance, they want to know my age, which has nothing to do with anyone else. Some of them want to know if I get the old age pension, and I am able to tell them that I am not able to get the old age pension for what I consider to be a strange reason. I spent some time in South America, and because I have not been back in Canada for 10 years, I cannot get the old age pension. So any of you who are senior citizens might be interested to know that according to Canadian law, one has to be in the country for a complete and entire 10 years, even if one is a naturalized Canadian citizen, before one can get the old age pension. In 1975, I shall have been back in Canada for 10 years, so then, if I'm still alive, I have to sign a form so that another person can collect the old age pension for me, as I cannot go in person to do it. I am also asked if Mrs. Rampa still lives with me, and I was about to say, well, obviously she does. But in these days of sudden or instantaneous divorces, it's not so obvious anymore, is it? So let me say, yes, Mrs. Rampa does live with me, and so does Buttercup, Mrs. Sheila M. Rouse, who lives with us as a member of our family, and as a very important member of our family at that. Sometimes I get offensive letters from Australia. I had one letter from Australia from a man by the name of Samuels. He wrote to me in a thoroughly unpleasant manner, saying that there had been no word from Mrs. Rampa, and if I was genuine, why didn't Mrs. Rampa say so? Well, actually, she has done so many, many times. But I'll tell you what, I'll let Mrs. Rampa start the next chapter with a few uninhibited words, unguided by me, undirected by me, so she can say what she likes. So, Mr. Publisher, will you put on some soft music dim the lights over our readers and prepare to illuminate the spotlight, because for the next chapter we will have Mrs. Rampa start it. End of chapter 10.